say some more about her. So, story will take you into mindfulness, and story may take you out of mindfulness too. Don't get too attached to this. Look, no mindfulness gurus in the room. Ain't no mindfulness gurus sitting here. I'm not any kind of an enlightened master. I'm going to go find Meg Cohen or Chris McKenna, or I'm going to go find something, but it ain't going to be me. I do these presentations for these teachers now in New York City, and for all these professionals, and for principals, and for superintendents, and there always gets to a point where they're like, and I'm like, stop. And I say, I'm not some enlightened master. I'm not practicing this mindfulness because I like levitate at home or see Buddha fields and stuff like that. I'm practicing this mindfulness to keep my job, keep my marriage, keep my sanity, keep my road rage in check. I'm an ordinary, imperfect human being practicing mindfulness. So let's have more ordinary, imperfect human beings practicing mindfulness. The last thing we need is another white male talking about mindfulness and talking about it in ways that I'm sure you that in some way I have a handle on this. No, I don't get it that way, and it shouldn't be that way. Let me do a quick check here. Is anybody here feeling they want to call the police or anything? Am I doing okay so far? So I suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome, and like that guy Michael Nash who sees people when he's talking, I don't see people when I'm talking. I have emotions come up that tell me they're going to find out that you're a fraud. The guy with the straitjacket is right outside the door, right? So, here's another thing. If we're going to talk about story, this is the thing we got to do. And this is a particular group. I'm talking to this group as if this group is the group that came on Thursday to a conference and not on Friday, which says a lot about anybody who goes to any kind of a conference, right? Usually you got the Friday, the Saturday, but damn, you came on Thursday. I'm like, okay, so if they're coming on Thursday, these people are for real. Or they're in a school that they just have to get the hell out of. You know what I mean? In that case, either way, it's good that you're here, you know. But you've got some skin in the game if you're here today, you know. And so for that reason, I'm just going to say to you, what qualifies you to do this work? What gives you the right to be the mindfulness teacher? Oh, well, I took the online training, and I took the mindful schools year long, or, I did that, and, well, I've been reading about this for quite some time, None of those are wrong, right? I'm not saying any of them are wrong. By the way, who decides who the mindfulness teachers are? Right? Oh man, when I first got into this, I did all the Dharma retreats, the Datsuns. I wanted to find the Zen path, the Tibetan Buddhist path. I went there. I wanted to investigate it. That's all there was in the 90s. Nobody was having mindfulness, But you'd be sitting there going, hell man, this would be great if I could find a way to learn this to my kids, right? Then you have those moments, like you're out there investigating it for yourself and you're going, oh my God. So, and which one are you? Are you the trickster? Have you had to not only pull a few jokes on yourselves, but pull a few jokes on a few other people? Listen, tricksters aren't necessarily everybody's special person to see. I will tell you, I've been a bit of a trickster in New York City. Oh yeah. It doesn't hurt if people sometimes think you're a little crazy. I'm not trying to be crazy, but if people, I'm just saying, the trickster, read about the trickster. Read about what the trickster does. Read about what the person who doesn't take themselves so seriously and also comes into situations where everybody wants to get real serious about what's happening. We've got a crisis, our kids, and then all of a sudden you're the mindfulness person who's like, okay, what drug is he on, Are you the sage? Are you the artist? Which one are you? take time during this thing, I would say, to figure that out, and then come to me and say, why'd you say that? And I'll talk to you about this book and why I'm really buying into what this argument is that Arthur Koestler is making in The Act of Creation, that the actual moment of creation in science and in the arts and in the comedic craft, the craft of the comedian. Think about a good comedian. Those ones that tell a joke and you're like, you're having a dissociative experience. They're hitting you and it's like, damn, they just did something to me, right? But this guy Koestler is saying that the moment of discovery, and that's one of the arguments I want to make, is I think mindfulness is like a field for these kinds of moments of an interdependent ha-ha, aha, and ah moment. All three combined. You go home tonight, you go to your room, practice it. Do it in rounds, like ha 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 ha. Man, everybody will become professor. So, the director of mindfulness in education, very important. Doesn't have anything to do with me. It has everything to do with we. Why? We've got to start establishing the title, the role, the concept. We've got to help folks understand that, yeah, in any kind of a school system, there's a director of mindfulness. And hell, we don't need some, we need some, we've got our literacy coaches and our math coaches. Let's get a damn mindfulness coach. Right? So, this is part of what I want to say to you. Start thinking that way. Because I started thinking that way in the 90s, right? And look how long it took to get here. That's why you have to be so patient. And you're going to make mistakes. But we have got to have a director of mindfulness in education in every city school system. And every school needs to have a budget line that says that if you want, we're not going to impose it though. We're not saying you have to have a line, because this is not a mandate, not an issue. This is another big radical thing. Ooh, in New York City, I'm like, listen, Chancellor, listen, Mayor, listen, people. This cannot be an initiative, a rollout. This can't be a voluntold. We're I'm gonna say, here's a strategy. It seems to be that some of your colleagues, and who am I talking to? I'm talking to experts in the field. I'm talking to teachers. So when I go and I speak to teachers in New York City, the first thing we talk about is, I don't know if this is any good or not. You're the expert. Take this strategy and investigate it for yourself. And then come back and tell us. How do you think that makes people feel? I mean, that's about being mindful about mindfulness. You could be a higher power offering salvation to the world, and if you make it a mandated thing in New York City, people are going to tell you to go take a flying leap. Because we're not respecting our profession, right? We're not respecting our own teachers. You are licensed pedagogues, right? As far as the state is concerned, the only one who can go into a classroom, a public school classroom, and teach anything to any kid is you. And it makes sense because I don't know if John Kabat-Zinn or the Dalai Lama or Sierra, I don't know if they know what's developmentally appropriate for a kindergarten, first grader, second grader, all the way to 12th grade, or Sabbath counseling. You do. Very important. I say a lot about that. Doesn't make everybody happy. But why a coalition of schools educating mindfully? Why? I mean, it was fun. It was fun meeting Tracy, and for me, a parent interested in this, I wasn't seeing anything else but a parent. And I thought, that's the missing link in this right now, in a lot of ways. And this parent was saying, I really think I want to start. And I was like, yes. And I think there was a little bit of a trickster in me, like, how can I trick her into doing this? You know what I mean? And what I didn't realize was that she was a powerhouse, a dynamo. Look what she's accomplished. And what's your husband's name? Gary, man, Gary came up and gave me a hug, and I gave Gary a big hug of condolence and compassion. Because, you know Gary, I know you've been working it, man. 2 kids? 3? And you built, and you got all this together in this amount of time? See, I think there's not a movement happening around mindfulness. I'm not down with that. I don't think it's a fad. I don't think it's a trend. I think it's an emergence. And I like the word emergence because I think in some ways we're in times of emergency. Right? I'm not talking about that package that you can put in water. Something is emerging. It's like a wave that comes on and you have to ride the wave. I feel like I'm on a wave in this role of director of mindfulness. But what does that mean? What does it mean to you to be in a coalition of schools? Please consider that. Take this time, because the Coalition of Essential Schools is a very powerful coalition of schools, very committed to some deep values around how they want to teach kids in small schools. The Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color is another very powerful coalition. This too should slowly, gradually, organically ripple out like a pebble in a pond and expand into a coalition of schools educating mindfulness. Right? And think about that, because now you're in a leadership role. Now you're in a pioneer role. Now it's like, wow, this is either really insane or this is something that's like going to go down in history. It's one or the other. And it's like, if it's going to go down in history, it's going to be because you made a decision to shift your own thinking. Remember, you have a mindfulness practice. You have a mindfulness journey. I have a mindfulness journey. Right? What does this inspire us to do? Organize, do a conference every year, chapters. Tracy has a lot of ideas about that. And then we got to start thinking about our story. Our story. Not his story, not her story. Our story we have to tell. All right. So now, meet Chancellor Carranza. Now I want to get into a little more nuts and bolts. Chancellor Carranza, he's the Chancellor of the New York City Department of Education. He came in last year. This is a funny little skit that happened the other day at a major thing with all the superintendents and all these principals, and he walked in, and I was there. Just so you know, I dress up in suits when I have to. I'll wear the damn suit. Any of you who look at my Facebook and things, you can tell I'm working it. One thing you know, oh hell, Barnaby's working it. I am. I'm not going to lie. I'm working it. And he walked in, and he said, Barnaby, did you meditate this morning? Looking at him like, it was like one of these events where everybody had to be on deck and be there like 6 a.m. to set everything up, like today, you know? I'm looking at him, well, it's 6 a.m. I'm not meditated yet. And he said, I said, have you? He said, yeah, 20 minutes every morning. And I said, come on, we're taking a picture right now. And I said, listen, we have to talk. We got to talk. Because this is getting big now. And he said, I know. And he said, I'm going to schedule a meeting with you. Now, this is intense. 1,800 schools, New York City, big. When the chancellor says, I want to have a meeting with Barnaby, all my mid-level bosses are like, what the hell's going on? What the hell's going on? You know what I mean? What are you going to talk about? Let's see the documents before you're going to... And I'm just telling them, we got to talk about this mindfulness because it's for real. Now, this guy's a Mexican-American. He's an artist, he's a musician, he's an educator, he's a leader. He was in San Francisco. He championed the school, Visitation High School, that used quiet time. He was the guy who cleared the runway for that. My point is this. Don't just be looking for the mindfulness gurus out there. Look for the power holders and decision makers who are waiting to meet you so that they can clear the runway for you. Don't you second guess that these people don't have an interest in mindfulness or in yoga just because they haven't written a book about it. They don't have time to write a book about it. This guy is in the Mariachi Hall of Fame. He is. He's a serious artist. He comes to New York City, and the first thing he talks about is we've got to desegregate. How do you think that went down in New York City? Ooh, Jesse. Ooh. He said we've got to stop admiring the decision we made 60 years ago. Right? What was that called? Brown versus Board. And we have to do something about it. And even now, he's trying to do little percentage-based integrations of some of the schools that have been cherished little, oh, we'll take care of this school, thanks. We've got our fun, And people's brains are popping. And so what do you think they're going to need to deal with their brains popping? They're going to need to know how to sit in their bodies. They're going to need to know how to be with their minds. It's a good time for mindfulness in New York City when you got a chancellor who's saying we got to desegregate. Because making a decision to live in harmony with another human being or to face your own bias is not just that's an embodied practice too. Right? We're going to go and be in the same spaces together. We're going to eat together. We're going to walk together. I grew up in Boys Town, mostly black, brown, white kids. We lived together. We slept together. We showered together. We were in rooms. There were a lot of really terrible things about it. But one damn issue that I don't have is I'm not into this thing where, when I'm in the presence of another human being, there's some kind of othering going on that I'm conscious of. But there could be a lot of unconscious othering going on. And what's going to help surface that unconscious othering? Yes, you said it, mindfulness. Now, check this list. This is Cheryl Watson Harris. She's amazing. Cheryl, born in Brooklyn, goes to Boston, becomes the principal, comes back. This is like in Brooklyn South. It's like 6 years ago. I'm trying to give you a sense of how this began to happen. Okay? So, each borough has a borough support office center, and she came in to direct that office. And she came in with this energy that was just off the hook. That's Cheryl, right? Cheryl's the one closest to us. And she walks in, and they say to me, Barnaby, will you work with... Nobody's talking about mindfulness. Nobody's talking to me about mindfulness. I'm just an experienced administrator who knows how to work with people. Will you work with Cheryl? She's coming to me. She's going to be the ED. And I say to Cheryl, what do you want to do? She says, I want to do something about the criminalization of black and brown girls in our school. Think about this. How often does an administrator on that level come out and say something like that? Usually they'll say something like, well, we've got to close the achievement gap, and we've got to, and you hear this stuff that, they heard somewhere else. It's not genuine, it's not really true. They're not bad people, but, they're in that situation. They're in that matrix of gobbledygook. And she said, no, I want to do, and so my first job was teaching girls at Rikers Island. How do you think I felt about that? So I connected her to Casey Freed Jennings, who made a film called Girl Rising, and Casey's a buddy of mine. She's the widow of Peter Jennings. This thing took off, the girls' empowerment movement. Wasn't even about mindfulness. What's my point? Use your mindfulness before you even start talking about mindfulness to develop relationships of trust and confidence with the people who can clear runways for you. Forget your mindfulness. To them, that looks like that's your agenda. So be mindful and go, really, if I'm practicing mindfulness, I don't really sort of have an agenda. How are you? What are you doing? Oh, you want to do that? How can I be an ally for you in that work? How do you think they feel about you when you do that? They turn around and look at you and say, well, what do you want to do? Only, that's a power holder. That's a power holder who says, what do you want to do? And you say, what do you want to do? They're going to turn around and say, get out of his way. Or, if, again, we don't want to force this down people's throat, but my thing was, look, I just want to get the New York City Department of Education to pay attention to mindfulness in its own system. There's nothing new I want to do. It's been emerging for the last 30 years. I would just like to get real around if the whole New York City Department of Education were a human being. I'd like that human being to just practice mindfulness. And so the NYC DOE would start getting mindfulness and yoga in its 1,800 schools. Because they're not even looking at it. They're not even really talking about it. They have no idea what the impacts of it, and they're all talking about these initiatives, suspensions, grades, high-stakes testings, and we're all sitting here doing this work saying that these strategies actually speak directly to those issues. Right? It's a holistic approach to social, emotional, academic, leadership, learning. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea. It's not for everybody. But even when you do it for yourself, like that Curry study. Anybody seen that Curry study that Patricia Jennings did? When teachers practice mindfulness for themselves, the quality of instruction goes up. Who benefits? So my point is that she became a champion. Now she's the first deputy chancellor. So she got promoted. So when she got promoted, she said, "You're coming with me." So now we go to headquarters, tweet, right? Now this is where I say, let's take it to the documents, and it's going to get really existential here. But I wanted to do this because I want you to see some of these things that I think are really important. And I hope I do it right. So now she gets promoted, and she's in the office of field support or anything. But now it's like, we got to start looking at this citywide. And you need to start thinking about this citywide. You need to think about your district, your rural, your town, your city. You've got to be ready. If this work is even half as good as we are saying it is, and running to each other and saying, "My God," if it's even half that good, then these people who are in charge of these bureaucratic systems, they're going to panic and they're going to want to jack it up real quick. We know that, right? I'll tell you some stories about people who said I was being insubordinate when they first decided to get excited about mindfulness. And one high executive, not Cheryl Watson-Harris, not Richard Carranza, but one high executive called me up on the phone and said, "Could you come and do 2 3-hour mindfulness trainings?" For who? For the guidance counselors in the city. And what? What? 2 3 hours and what? Well, then they'll be, ready to teach mindfulness. I said no. This person was high up on the chain, but she hadn't asked Cheryl. I was working for Cheryl, and I said, "You'll find somebody to do that for you. You can find somebody to do that for you." And can I just say this? Meg Cowan said it best, even when she was getting excited about bringing mindfulness through mindful schools and mindful schools focus. There's going to be a continuum. There's going to be really ineffective mindfulness teachers. There's going to be developing mindfulness teachers. There's going to be effective mindfulness teachers. There's going to be amazing mindfulness teachers. We can't do anything about that. That's part of the situation that we're agreeing to work with. This whole thing about, don't do it, it's going to be corrupted and it'll be, well, what do you mean? Who isn't capable of corrupting this? I've seen some potential wise people doing some really corrupting things, so let's get off of that. Right? And there's going to be a continuum of really ineffective implementation of mindfulness and not being prepared, and there's going to be really effective. So I actually presented this at my weekend retreat at Mindful Schools. People were like, "What the hell is he talking about?" It was like, "Oh my God, he thinks he's Trotsky and he's going to take over Russia." But we had to start looking at it systemically because the power holders wanted to grow in the whole system. Don't think that these people aren't into it. They just need you. They need you to help them see how they can do it. So we started from the top. The leadership people needed resiliency training, so we went to the Kripalu Institute in the Berkshires, which is now a high-end health and wellness center, and got them to give us 300 free RISE trainings, are what they called, where leaders, the superintendents, the executive directors, could go up to the Berkshires, away from New York City, be in a nice place like Pheasant Run, put their cell phones down, and be introduced to yoga and mindfulness strategies for leadership resiliency. What do you think happened? We sent 300 people. What do you think happened? these people came back. Best professional development I've had in my career, you know. I mean, these are senior leaders, major careers. They go and speak at conferences, you know. I need to talk to Barnaby. Barnaby, I want all my principals to go to Trapal, you know. And you know, what are we going to do? Because let me tell you something. Trapal went cheap. Trapal donated those things to us. You know what I'm saying? That's not a sustainable thing. Unless some 1%er wants to just pay for all of New York City, that could happen. But so we started breaking it down to say, look, this is our game plan. This is how we see doing this. And you guys should think about it this way too. It's not a bad thing for you to do. Think of it as an exercise where you say, well, wow, what kinds of things would we address that are important in the schools? These are some of the major issues in New York City. Mental health, trauma. We want democratic values. We want equity, social justice. These are big things. But those are really theme-based things that teachers can sink their teeth into, you know what I mean? Like in the high school line. But it goes up into the school-based things like resilience, increased attendance, these ones in purple. These are the ones that, like, you know, the numbers crunchers are looking at, you know, the state people. And yeah, be an ally. Like, yeah, it's good for that. Go ahead. But I wanted you to see that. You think that's enough? I think you get the idea, right? I want to show you something else, though, that I think will sort of help you in that will it blow your mind. It's still blowing my mind now, let me tell you. So the chancellor comes in, and then he becomes the full chancellor in September, and he becomes the, you know, or he wasn't chancellor last year, but he really laid out, this is how I'm going to roll in this work. Oh, you can't see it that well. But this is very interesting. I think I can blow it up, right? Okay. Is that better? No? More? Okay. I want you to start thinking about creating a theory of action. If I wanted to be really like, have you all really upset with me, that would be an exercise. Create a theory of action. This is what the power holders and decision makers want to hear, like, what's your theory of action for this work? Now, it's one of those edgy-speak words, but it's not that difficult, and it's actually quite helpful for us to have that. And it helps you get clear about your work. So when he came in, he was talking about this big thing called the renewal schools. Now, I don't know if you know about the whole renewal school thing in New York City. I'm not going to talk about it because it's political and intense, and some people thought it was a great success, and some people thought it was a tremendous failure. And when he came in, he said, I'd like to see what the theory of action is for that issue. So I'm listening, right? Here's a new guy. Is he for mindfulness or is he against mindfulness? How am I going to let him know that I'm down with how he's rolling? And if his style is to say, I want a theory of action, what am I doing? I'm typing the theory of action for mindfulness, you know, and I'm looking at theories of action, you know, and just do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's an emerging field. Who the hell knows what a theory of action is for mindfulness anyway? But we have to start getting into the mix, you know? So this is what we did. If New York City professionals, primarily school-based pedagogues, I hate reading from things, but it's a document, so I want you to think this through. School-based pedagogues and educational leaders work collaboratively within the holistic approach. Use that word holistically. Use holistic, don't use SEL. See, mindfulness, SEL is a piece of pie that sits in the pie of mindfulness. Okay? Mindfulness is the white primer that you put on the wall before you paint the wall whatever color you're going to paint it. This is something that I'm pushing for. It's not an SEL. Right? This is holistic. We've got leaders taking mindfulness classes. There's articles about mindfulness in engineering. And anyway, so if they work collaboratively within a holistic approach to, and so this is what you all have your educational mission that's put out by your person, your leader, articulated the chancellor's 4 priorities. That's important. That was a big thing he put out. That's his talk. Find their language. Okay, and if they're provided with quality academic, social, emotional, civic services to students, if they're allowed to do that, right? And if they're provided, and these acronyms are just names of special teams, that's no big deal, but basically, if they're provided with the time and space to investigate, not time and space to be told what to do and how we'll be coming in to observe you next week. Time and space to investigate, apply, and refine strategies of mindfulness and yoga via tailored. What do you need? What do you need? Let's see if we can have something that speaks to your needs. And facilitate, which means I'm not the sage on the stage. I'm talking a lot today, but you can already tell by the way I'm talking that I need a lot of help. So, you know what I'm saying? So you're facilitating it, and you're doing a lot of group work, and you're helping them think about where they would do this. And if it's aligned to the elements for the framework for grade schools, whatever your city system is saying, this is what we're about, differentiated instruction or universal design, everybody's going to say something. So take a look at it and align it. Talk about how the mindfulness is no threat to it, right? The 6 keys and everything, chances, priorities, let's list all those things, right? And if they participate in the development of assessments that provide evidence of impact around how mindfulness and yoga strategies support student performance aligned to predetermined expectations for academic outcomes. Now this is our work, guys, I think. Tell me if I'm wrong, but we can't rely on the outside researchers to do the work anymore. How many of you have been told about cycles of inquiry and had been doing action research in your schools? A lot of us have been trained in action research. So I have a school, a big middle school in Queens. They're doing action research, and they're going to create a model that the other schools can use to do action research. And we can look at our own data. Your teachers, you probably know a lot about your students that are looking at about a bunch of qualitative and quantitative data anyway. But if you go to your principal and say, look, this will be a good CEP goal for you for your year to let your teachers do an action research project around mindfulness, they get excited. And then you show how you're an ally to the very situation that these people are in. Because a lot of these people think mindfulness is another thing, right? Oh, it's another thing. It's not another thing. It's a dovetail thing to whatever it is you're in. Now, this is tricky for us. Because what if the thing that it's a dovetail for is, stuff that we politically and philosophically disagree with? This is one of the unanswered questions that we're going to have to continue to investigate, right? People who are concerned about how mindfulness could be co-opted and used to cultivate compliant, obedient members of the state, functional members of, or an appendage of somebody's computer system, right? It's okay, we don't have to know the answer to that right now. We just have to be willing to, we know about mindfulness, let's just sit with the question and breathe into it for a while. Something might rise up. And then they'll know how to define it. So that's a theory of action. We can talk more about that, but when a decision maker or a leader sees that you have a view like that, they get excited. Now they can fund it. You've given them what they need to see so that they can start clearing more runways. Help these folks to help you, I guess, is a little bit of what I'm saying. When I say these folks, do you know what I'm talking about? The people you need to have permission from to do the work you want to do. Aren't you all facing somebody who's potential champion or potential nemesis for what you're trying to do? This is the big challenge for us right now. I feel it's like the Dr. Seuss book, Green Eggs and Ham. Won't you please try some green? Won't you try? No. Then they try it. The other thing I say a lot is first they ignore you. That was the 90s for me. Then they ridicule you. That was like 2000 to 2005. Then they attack you. Ooh, I was getting into some serious, you would have been looking at me going through this now, look very mindful to me. Because it was being attacked, and I was like, fuck it, I'm going to attack back. I'm going to mindfully attack back. because I believe in it. And I don't care at a certain point, because one day my body's going to be a corpse anyway. And I'm 57 and I got 10-year-old ready, and a 15-year-old son, and I got to be about something. And when they see that, it sort of shocks them. Like, what? He's about something. Oh my God. Another crisis.